I think that should fix it. I have no idea what's going on. Like there's some sort of glitch with YouTube and my software. I have no idea what's going on, but I hope the sound is there. Let me just get some comments come through just to confirm that. Bad Brad is saying BDL no sound. Lukanyo, we can't hear you. Guys, you should be able to hear me now. So I'm just going to wait until confirmation for that. I was just basically saying, whilst I was waffling away in silence, that I've actually been very disappointed. There is clearly something wrong with my software that I use to broadcast and send a signal up to YouTube, and YouTube itself has been very glitchy lately. So I'm just I think you can hear from my tone. I've been spending the last sort of 4 days troubleshooting, fixing errors, getting assistance from gurus on this issue. So I'm hoping you guys can hear me now. And yeah, guys, as I said, Molo San Bonani, hello, how's it going on? And shalom. Welcome to Late Nights with Big Daddy Liberty. It's been a while since you and I have had a chat. I am now in Cape Town. I'm firmly on the ground wall. Essentially, I've begun hitting communities here in the Western Cape. Just give me a moment, guys. Let me just fix my mic direction, just to avoid that heavy popping noise. That should be better, I hope. Sorry about that, folks. I'm just fixing all my little glitchy situations here, but okay, good. I can see Brad saying sound is 10 out of 10. Brad is saying the sound is 10 out of 10. Look, Hanyo, welcome to the show. Ween Brand, welcome to the show. Luto, welcome to the show, brother. Guys, welcome to the show. Look, tonight's show is actually going to be relatively quickish. We are going to be done by 10. There's someone I wanted to introduce you guys to, someone who I think is one of those important voices in South African, in the South African political analysis space. But he isn't, he isn't someone who you'll see a lot on mainstream media. But he's someone who I go to a lot for advice and analysis and opinion. In fact, you will find his stuff ever increasingly on the Daily Friend website. That's www.dailyfriend.co.za for all the news, analysis, and opinion. And of course, I'm talking about John Endres, who's just been appointed as the Chief of Staff at the Institute of Race Relations. So he's the second in command there now, one of the head honchos in that part of the world. So I'll bring you a nice, lazy Sunday evening chat to end off the week with him as we look at the news week that was. What are some of the big ticket items that made, that made you talk, that got you interested, that had you pissed off perhaps? I know there's quite a few issues that I want to, put to him and have a chat to about tonight. But at the end of this evening, I wanted to be able to have answered the question, and excuse the background noise if there is any, street noise. I'm quite close to the streets where I am now. But by the end of this evening, I want us to have a firmer grasp of how much the tectonic plates of politics have shifted in South Africa in the past week in particular. And I think John is someone who can assist in that regard in providing just solid analysis in that regard. Let me just see if I can quickly fix. There we go. That should be a bit better. So before I get to that, I also want to give you guys feedback on the groundwork and what I've been doing and where I am. I must quickly mention again, I am in Cape Town, and guys, it's been very interesting. It's been very interesting. I've done a lot of community-based outreach, trying to build a network of people who can facilitate meetings for me, and I mean community meetings in places like Nyanga, Kylie, Side B, and Mitchell's Plain, Beacon Valley to be specific. And the reception so far has been good. insofar as, number one, ordinary South Africans are absolutely frustrated with the state of things. Absolutely frustrated with the state of things. And if you think, being in the middle class, that you feel as though you're disenfranchised and you don't have a say in the politics, perhaps multiply that by 100 when it comes to the more poorer segments of our society. People who don't even get an opportunity to write into newspapers, for example, to be a part of that chattering class, who, as I said, write into newspapers, call into radio, etc., etc. For them, they're just experiencing, essentially, the absolute degradation of their quality of life, which already was at the brink, if not already over the edge. And I think it's those people who are resonating with me and are coming to these events. I must say, I'm cautiously optimistic. Because of that, I genuinely, and I say cautiously, and I'll explain why I say cautiously. Number one, the one thing that's become patently clear, that what I do is very dangerous. What I do, in terms of the groundwork, is very dangerous. It is upsetting a lot of people who don't want their little house of cards to be disrupted. And I've noticed that quite intensely in the past few weeks. But again, I keep saying this to people, I'm not deterred. I'll tell you why I say I'm not deterred. Because there is a hunger in this country for something different. There is a hunger in this country by ordinary people for different ideas that they can rally around. Remember, I'm not a politician. I'm not a protest march type activist. Even though some of you saw some of my previous vlogs, where as we arrived at Parliament for the Stop Farm Murders protest, I was actually invited up to speak. It's not that I was there to speak and lead a protest. That's not me. If anything, I walked up there just because I wanted to do an ordinary show. How I usually do it, right? Talk to the people who are there. Why are you here, etc., etc. The point is this. The groundwork for me is more important because I'm talking to the people who ordinarily these ideas don't reach them. They don't have the data to sit and watch me talk on the show. They don't have the data to watch Ramon Kabanak and Morning Shot or Germ Warfare or any of these other guys who are YouTubers like me. I think I've made this clear to you guys at least too, to say there is something bigger that I'm trying to achieve here, which is to actually physically get up off my bum and go into these communities and actually talk to people. Actually just talk to people. Take the moment to actually respect people and engage them on ideas. And actually engage them on ideas. So again, I just thought I had to sort of revisit that, because I've been getting a lot of requests even on my social media for people saying, oh, you've got to meet this person. He's exactly like you. Or you've got to meet that organization. They're exactly like you. And I'm kind of like, what's the point of that, right? Because I've thought I've been quite clear in saying the point of Big Daddy Liberty and my mission is to talk to the people who are not exactly like me, people who maybe don't have or hold these liberty ideas, people who for maybe most of their lives they've been sheltered away from these ideas by the sort of people who have a vested interest in sheltering people away. The sort of politicians, for example, who spew this leftist nonsense that argues that people are inherently victims, and because they're inherently victims, they need them, the politicians, to control their lives and protect them from those evil whites or those clever blacks or those racist Indians or any of these tropes that you hear politicians often spew that are racial and racist in nature. How about we actually do the work of going into those communities to give those people different ideas? So that's my mission. So please, guys, don't take offense when I say, look, I'm not really interested in meeting this person because they agree or being on that person's show because they agree. Because to a large extent, I don't feel like that's a productive use of the battle of ideas. The idea that we need to start actually going into communities and breaking the stronghold of, the communist and the socialist ideology that is pervasive, the racializing ideology, and actually put these liberty ideas into communities so we can actually say, hey, Mrs. Okay, I shouldn't name names. But hey, mama who sells hot coffee and baked goods early in the morning at the train track, how about I introduce these liberty ideas for you that essentially empower you, that break the power of the state and literally put it into your hands as a parent in the household inside BK Licha, so that you can make more decisions about your life and the welfare of your kids, are decisions that you make. These are the ideas that I'm essentially prosecuting in these communities when I talk about being in the battle of ideas. So I had to revisit that. I had to quickly state that because I don't know. I've been feeling a little. I've been feeling a little pressured, if that makes sense, to meet people that I don't think, when I do then meet them and we have a fantastic conversation, right? Don't get me wrong, I have a fantastic conversation with them, but at the end of it, I feel like, but I could have used these 2 hours or hour actually doing the groundwork, right? So food for thought. I thought I should actually, just quickly begin with that. Again, guys, welcome to the show. If you've just joined us, it's not going to be a long show. We will be done by 10. This show is also open to you guys completely. Maybe you read something this week or this weekend in the weekend papers that made you angry, that got you talking. Maybe you had a conversation around the dinner table. Bring those questions into here. I'm going to be joined shortly by, in a minute or so, by John Endres, who is the newly appointed Chief of Staff at the Institute of Race Relations, a powerhouse, an intellectual powerhouse in classically liberal thought in this country. So I'm going to have him on the show just now. You must just bear with me as I make that connection. As I said, keep the comments coming. I see all small audience tonight, and that's quite fine. I see 54 of you guys. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. I am keeping an eye to the comments. Offense, hello. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much. Leona Singh, you're the only person I saw who actually believes in the truth. You go, Big Daddy. We need more. I'm not a politician, Leona, but thank you very much. Bad Brad, hey man, welcome to the show. The ain't of shucking and jiving. They really are. They actually really are. And it's rather disgusting. And here's the wonderful thing about it. The public, the ordinary public, are actually beginning to see it. The issue becomes, how do we rally those people now behind something they can stand for and use to fight back? So we're going to have that conversation with John. Nardis Ellis, keep up the great work. Let's all become humanist. There is a big drive within the politicians to keep the race card alive and stay in power. I agree. Absolutely. Totally agree. David, straight on. I'm driving the audio a bit too loud. Back off a bit. I'm going to turn it down a notch. Just let me know, David, how it sounds now. Should be a bit better. And last comment before I go to my guest. Shingwedzi Langa. Hello, Buti. Welcome. Or CC. Sorry, I don't know what gender that is. I've got 3 Castle Lager cans left. Brother. Hey, man. I know that struggle. I don't drink myself, but I often do keep kosher wine for my Friday evenings. So Friday evenings, all Jews have a Shabbat dinner that involves bread and wine, or just grape juice. I used to enjoy the wine, but not anymore. Thanks to these damn politicians. I know your struggle, homie. Vernon Naiga, hi, welcome to the show. Just a quick comment from him. What made me angry, says Vernon, reading the 5G towers can be affected on my property without my consent or compensation. The minister has passed a law. I think it's just not a recommendation, a proposal. What can be done to stop this? I think it's open to public comment, but you're right. It's absolutely disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. But remember, Vernon, I've been warning people about this almost since I began this channel, if anything. The idea that these politicians, because of their ideology, they don't respect property rights. They don't respect property rights. Remember, I keep saying that the whole point of the BDL mission is to have an empowered citizenry who are able to defend and advance life, liberty, and property rights. And politicians in this country, because of their leftist-leaning ideology, which basically seeks to place all ownership of things in the hands of the state, all power in the hands of the state, and when I say state, I mean them, as politicians, they then don't have an incentive to respect an individual or really families' property rights. The idea that we as families can say, we fenced this off, it belongs to us, this is ours. They don't respect that. So of course the Minister of Tourism, was it tourism or communications? I might be mixing those two, but in any event, of course some minister, some politician, drunk on that ideology of being pro-government, can say something like, yeah, we in government can make a decision that someone else can just set up some piece of equipment, in this case a 5G tower, on your property without even your consent. Of course they'll say things like that, because they don't respect property rights. And by the way, that notion of property rights is absolutely critically important, especially for even poor South Africans who don't have physically a piece of property that they may call home, but are looking to acquire one. The whole thing of looking to acquire one comes with not only getting it, but also securing it. And politicians undermine those two elements. The one, acquiring it yourself, because politicians say, no, we'll give you property rights, which is absolute nonsense. And two, the idea of securing it, they completely undermine it by saying that, yeah, even though you have it, it's not really yours. We, the politicians, can make willy-nilly decisions to affect that. So guys, these are the sort of issues on a practical day-to-day level of why my ideas are important and why it's important to filter them into a society so that people can defend their right to life, liberty, and property. But we'll get into that with our guest. Let me maybe give him a call. Just bear with me, guys. I'm gonna just cut to my holding screen for a second as I give my guest a call. After this, I'll be joined in conversation with John Endres. All right, guys, I'm back. I just had to quickly establish John on the line. He is joining me right now. I'm going to bring him on in a second. Remember, just a quick reminder, John Endres is the newly appointed Chief of Staff at the Institute of Race Relations, someone who as I mentioned, he's quite active on Twitter. And I'd really encourage you to follow him. It's at Senderman. But all of that information is in the descriptor of this video. Let me just put him onto the screen right now as I speak. There he is. John, hi. Welcome. You're live on the BDL show, at least the late nights with BDL. How are you doing, brother?
Super, doing very well.
Excellent. Good to have you on the show. John, before the little break I took just to bring you on, I was I was giving people a little bit of feedback as to, where I am in these early stages of my, I sort of broadly call it the ground war, the idea that of taking the classically liberal ideas that I hold, removing them from their ivory tower by and large, and actually putting them into ordinary communities, and having ordinary people engage them, whether I'm talking on issues of our right to life in the various guises and policy proposals I make on that, our right to, property, and of course our freedoms as individuals. And really I talk a lot about individuals, but really we're a family society, but our freedoms essentially as South African families. So maybe before I get into any of this, just for the benefit of the viewers, who is John Endres, and how did you come about becoming part of the IRR?
Well, that's quite a long story. So I used to work for a German political foundation called the Friedrich Naumann Foundation that promotes liberal values throughout the world. And one of the partner organizations I worked with was the Institute of Race Relations. And so that was back in the days when Franz Cronje, I think, was still relatively new at the Institute. But he and I worked together, and I gained a huge appreciation both for the man and also for the institution. And so it's a great honor and also a privilege to work for the Institute of Race Relations.
Absolutely, and I think it's richer for having you, John. Maybe let's hop straight into perhaps what I really wanted to chew the fat with you tonight about, which is really the news week that was, right? What are some of the big ticket items that made headlines, and what got people angry, what got us sad, what got us laughing, and it's a veritable mix of issues then, if I put it in those terms. But before I get there, just to remind you that we have about just over 83 people watching at the moment. Not a big crowd, but I have opened up questions from the get-go from them. So I'm going to also pepper you with questions from them.
Brilliant. Hello, everyone.
Hi. And remember to you guys out there, pop a question, to John and I, what got you interested talking, maybe gnashing your teeth this week? Let's have that chat from now until about 5 to 10. So, John, it's been a very interesting week, hasn't it? Insofar as an African National Congress, the ANC, the ruling party in this country, who are maybe beginning to join the dots, and they're realizing the political ramifications of what they've essentially been doing, right? Because it seems, I don't know, from my perspective, that there's a little bit of panic. And when politicians panic, they start making silly decisions. Not that they make good decisions otherwise, but they start getting very jittery, if you will. What's your read of what's been happening with the ruling party and government this past week?
Well, I think it is quite difficult to see what's happening inside the party from the outside. And what we do is that we look at what we can see on the surface and then try to understand what's going on in the inside. And the impression I share with you, which is that it almost looks as if somebody had poked a stick into an anthill, and the ants have started scurrying around in great panic and great agitation. And we've seen several stories coming out last week where the ANC does seem unsettled. And I think probably the first event, or one of the first events in that series, was President Ramaphosa's speech last week, in which he announced the establishment of a special force to prosecute and investigate corruption that was related to COVID. At the time, it seemed like a sensible thing to do, but we think at the Institute that this was related to the IMF money that the government applied for, and which was confirmed on Monday that it was getting. And there was something quite unusual about the way that confirmation came through. So the source of funds in this case is a rapid finance instrument, which is a kind of money that is available with very few strings attached, as opposed to other IMF money. So effectively, it's an emergency fund to help countries deal with a crisis, like in this case, the COVID crisis. But in South Africa's case, the IMF specified very clearly that it wanted to be sure that the money would not be misappropriated, wastefully spent, or stolen. And the IMF also mentioned that South Africa would need to engage in some structural reforms in order to ensure that it would be able to repay that money at a later stage. And this was quite unusual. So, it's unusual for the IMF to give money to a country and ask them please not to steal it. That's also a bit rude in a way.
But that tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it, about perhaps an international community that's growing wiser to the shenanigans in the ANC. I say this in light of, if you remember that viral clip, excuse me. I forget the journalist's name, a very prominent business journalist, CNN journalist, but I forget his name.
Richard Quest.
There we go, Richard Quest. Yes, thank you. Where he was asked what was seemingly a very tame and innocuous question, and he just literally eviscerated it by saying, "Actually, no. South Africa is where it is because of and I'm paraphrasing badly here, but he absolutely goes after the ruling elite in this country and says, no, it's the corruption and the political rot in that country, which literally holds it back. Let me circle back to this IMF loan, because I think that's what got a lot of South Africans talking. You know, a country that, in fact, it trended on social media. Not that that's a great indicator of anything, but it did sort of echo public sentiment, perhaps in the sort of middle class, if anything. A keen awareness by South Africans now that actually, you know, this government, it's literally composed of absolute hyenas. And people are sort of wondering, should we be loaning money to people who we know are literally just sort of, you know, licking their lips at the prospect of fleecing it? I know you guys have run a campaign on this. Do you want to maybe also talk about that?
Yeah. So we realized that the ANC was hoping to get this loan with as few strings attached as possible. We know that the very question of applying for this money caused some divided opinions within the alliance. So the SACP and COSATU were strictly opposed to the ANC government applying for the money because they realized that it would make the government beholden in a way to a foreign lender. And what the IRR did a couple of weeks ago was to start a letter campaign where we wrote letters to politicians in donor countries that give money to the IMF, pointing out some of the weaknesses in governance in the ANC government. We also wrote to think tanks in donor countries, alerting them to the fact that their country's government was giving money to the IMF, which was then going to disperse it to South Africa, where there was a great likelihood that the money would be misspent, wasted, or stolen.
And on this particular issue, I mean, and I'm kind of seeing it in the comments too, and I want to just zoom in on it. I think one of the big scandals now, for instance, involves the spokesperson to the presidency, not that her directly, but her husband in particular, who seems to have scored, as is allegedly always the case, and seemingly always the case with those who are connected with people in government, you know, scored mega bucks through not only his own company, but now it's also emerging a front company, in the excess of 60 million rand, allegedly, according to the papers. John, we were having this conversation, weren't we, indirectly, I think in the past 2 weeks or so, around the dangers of, and I'm sorry, I'm segueing a little differently in a different direction. We'll circle back to this. But I want to talk about the broad philosophical issue behind this, the dangers of having a government literally be... sorry, I'll trap on my own sentence construction there. Let me rephrase that. The dangers of a government that accords to itself the power to pick winners and losers in society. Invariably, when a government gives itself that power, and really when politicians give themselves that power, it's often their friends, isn't it, and those who are connected to the political elite who are the beneficiaries of this. Do you want to maybe talk about this and really the political ideology behind it, especially why we see it with the ANC?
Yeah, so I think the greater philosophical point is one about centralization and decentralization. And what this means is that in the case of centralization, you try to concentrate as much decision-making power and resources in the hands of a few people that then make decisions on behalf of the majority. And obviously, the idea underlying this is that these few people are more honest or cleverer than other people and are therefore able to spend the money better and more responsibly than people themselves would be able to. And the decentralization approach would say, no, it is better to let people make as many decisions as possible in their own lives.
That's right.
On their own responsibility, giving them the opportunity to win or to lose. You know, it'll work out sometimes and sometimes it won't work out. But overall, people are a lot more responsible about spending their own money than they are about spending other people's money. And I think that's what we're seeing here with the ANC, is that its natural inclination is towards centralization. This was particularly pronounced now during the COVID crisis, where we saw the establishment of a command council that really concentrated even more power in the hands of a small group of people who assumed that they knew what was best for the rest of the country. And you know, even if they were well-intentioned, which they may well have been, we should expect that a small group of people will make mistakes when making decisions. And if those decisions bind a very large number of people, then bad decisions will affect a very large number of people, which is what we're seeing now with the various bans, like the alcohol ban, the tobacco ban, the travel ban, the tourism ban. which are decisions made by a small group of people that affect millions and millions of lives in South Africa.
And, I'm just reading a question here from Janine Brown. Question/comment, if the world knows, Janine says, that the 500 billion rand was looted, why would they give South Africa even more money? And maybe let's speak to this issue, both because I think it's a double-edged issue from Janine. The idea that, it does seem as though South African politicians are looking to borrow to the hilt now, because they've almost fleeced, the local economy of revenue, essentially. I mean, SARS is already projecting that, look, they're going to come in 300 billion rand short, maybe even more, in terms of what they're projecting to collect. John, your thoughts on the growing debt bubble in this country and the ANC politicians who are borrowing more and more?
Well, I have some sympathy for the ANC politicians because they really are in a tight spot now. And this is a spot that is not just...
of course.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying self-created, sorry.
Yeah, self-created spot, exactly. We've been warning them for many years about the need to spend money responsibly and live within your means. And that is advice that was disregarded, which already put us into a difficult position before coronavirus happened. We were already running a big deficit. We were already accumulating a lot of debt. And that just exploded now with COVID. And the crisis is now one where there's very little scope for action, very little opportunity to try different things. The crisis is here. The emergency is here. And it requires money to fix. And there's not much money left. So I think they will have to continue borrowing. And to answer Janine's question, why would international lenders continue giving money? Well, partly it is if the government can spin a good story, which is what Ramaphosa was trying to do, President Ramaphosa, in his conference last week. We said, no, you can trust the government. We will treat them money with great care. We will be very responsible. We've got this huge new investigating unit that will make sure that the money doesn't get wasted. And this was a way of publicly signaling to lenders, you can trust us, you can give us money. We're good guys. And maybe just throwing in a comment on the bond market. So, there's also private creditors that lend money to South Africa. They do this by buying South Africa's debt effectively, which is bonds which the South African government issues. Mm-hmm. And what happens there is that the more risky the debt is considered to be, the higher the interest rate that it has to pay. So it means it becomes more expensive for South Africa, but that is how they are able to persuade people to lend them money, by offering them greater returns.
And let me speak to this issue, because one place where we might not see, and I'm sorry to jump around here a little bit. I mean, I'm realizing just how little time I have with you.
I'll follow you if I can, Sihle.
But any Big Daddy Liberty viewer knows that I've argued essentially that the ANC is going to retreat into three key areas now, especially just to support your view that the money's run out effectively, and you can only borrow so much to a large extent, but that borrowing also comes with very high, it's expensive borrowing, as you mentioned, but that the ANC, because of this, will retreat into three key areas, and we talk a lot about this as the IRR. Number one is prescribed assets. The idea that, hey, if we cannot be given money or lent money by international markets, we're going to look at this big pot of cash called South African pensions, and basically give ourselves the power as politicians to be able to dig into it and invest it in inverted commas where we see fit. So if we think Eskom needs 300 billion rand in any given moment, hey, let's dig into pensions and and take it from there. Mm-hmm. And sort of give pensioners a promissory note that will pay it back somehow, either through shares, which is what I think they'll probably want to do in that same Eskom, or I think the less preferred route would be in some sort of bond issued against Eskom. But sorry, I digress. Prescribed assets would be the one. The second would be expropriation without compensation. No politician who is as desperate as our current crop are would not look at the prospect of violating property rights and giving themselves the power to confiscate things without having to compensate someone for. That's another area. And the third, of course, and I'll let you chip in on all three, is the national health insurance. We've already heard and seen the hero complex being created, for example, around Zweli Mkhize, the idea that look at this guy, it's almost those old emotional videos that you used to get from the mining sector, guys going down a shaft with canaries, to see if the air is breathable, soup kitchens, very, very emotional stuff. But the issues behind it were never sort of vacillated in great detail. It's always sort of cloak and dagger stuff. And behind this hero complex that they're creating around Zweli Mkhize is that same hero, in inverted commas, then pitching to us the idea that we need to institute this thing called an NHI because look at how the hospitals collapsed under this crisis. And of course, there will be future crises, they'll argue, that need this NHI. So, John, I'm going to ask you to opine on these three areas because for me, these are the lagers the ANC is going to retreat into because it thinks it can defend them really well. So maybe unprescribed assets, your thoughts on this and what campaigns of the IRR have been running on this issue?
Well, I think maybe the thread that ties together these three ideas is something you were talking about earlier, which is property rights. And what all of these things have in common is that they are a violation or a proposed violation of property rights. So prescribed assets effectively says that if a pension fund invests money, it is required to invest a certain percentage of the funds under management into certain assets, which in the government's interest would be the loss-making parastatals. In other words, if they could make a rule saying 10% of the government employees' pension fund must be invested in Eskom, that could be a rule. And the problem with that is that all of these parastatals are losing money. So if you are a pensioner and your money gets put into those enterprises, your pension will be less. You're going to lose on your pension. And that's the terrible thing. We must also be alert to the fact that the ANC government likes to approach such tricky topics gingerly and in a very careful manner. And so if you read the communication that's come out so far, they're not actually talking about prescribed assets. What they say is that they want to change the regulations to make it possible for pension funds to choose, if they want to invest in parastatals. And obviously that would be fine, because if a pension fund manager thinks that he can make a better return by investing in SAA or Eskom, then they should do that. Why not? But from there, it's only a small step to actual prescribed assets, where then a percentage of the funds needs to be invested in certain assets like parastatals, and that's a dangerous development.
EWC?
The second, so go ahead.
I was just saying EWC.
Yeah, EWC, another violation of property rights. Here, the proposal of the government is also an idea that develops over time, but essentially what they were talking about was to make it possible in exceptional cases for the government to disown a person of their property, especially physical property like real estate, without paying any compensation for it. And this idea then became broader and broader and broader. Originally, it was meant to be subject to the jurisdiction of the courts. A proposal was then made that the executive, that is the government itself, should be able to decide on expropriating property without compensation by itself, without the involvement of the courts, except as to appeal decisions. And we think that this idea is being developed even further into the concept of custodial taking. And what custodial taking is something that the government has already applied twice before, once to water rights and once to mineral rights, where what they do is that they say, okay, we're not going to expropriate anything. The state will just take custody of the asset. So as it stands at the moment, the state is the custodian of all water in South Africa, and the state is the custodian of all mineral rights in South Africa. And by using this sleight of hand, they get around the need to pay compensation, because they say, property hasn't actually been transferred, ownership hasn't been transferred, it's just that the state is now the custodian. And this theory or this idea could also be applied to land, where the government would say, well, we've decided to backtrack on expropriation without compensation. We realize that we're encountering a lot of resistance, so we're going to change our proposal and talk about passing all real estate and in South Africa into the custodianship of the state, and the state will then be able to allocate this or reallocate the land to people as it sees fit.
A
Very
cra-
dangerous
I
proposal.
was, I was about to say an absolutely asinine and crazy proposal when one considers just how shambolic already this administration is. I mean, just imagine, dear viewer, giving that same government the power to have them decide what you can and can't do with your property. And speaking about giving them the power to decide what you can and can't do about something you own, in this case, let me segue to that third one, our healthcare, John. This idea that the national health insurance, effectively nationalizing all healthcare and centralizing all funding in healthcare, including funding that was in the private sector, into the hands of the state. Your quick thoughts on that before I go to the questions from the viewers.
Well, I do want to demonstrate some understanding for the government's position, because health is the most important thing that any one of us has, and we would want everybody to have the ability to receive services that promote good health and maintain good health. And so what the government is proposing is the idea that there should be universal health coverage, so that anybody who needs health treatment should be able to get it. And I think that is an idea that you can't really oppose without seeming like a monster. You're effectively saying that some people should be allowed to die because they're poor, and that's obviously immoral. But the question is then how, if the goal is universal coverage, if you want everybody to be able to get treatment, then how best do you achieve that? And the approach which the government is pursuing, I think, is a very, very bad approach, because what we observe in South Africa is that the public health sector, which effectively through clinics and hospitals is meant to give universal coverage. Anybody can go to a hospital or clinic and receive treatment there, free of charge, unless you're wealthy. But the thing is that it's very badly managed, full of rampant corruption, of ill treatment of patients. You see images of patients sleeping on floors. We had the Life Esidimeni scandal, and it's just that the whole thing is not working very well. And the way to make it work would be to allow the private sector to play a role, because our private health sector is one of the best in the world. It is well run, it is efficient, the medical specialists are very well trained, and you can get excellent care in South Africa, comparable to what you can get anywhere in the world. But the excellence of the private sector cannot be transferred or placed under government control and maintained. So this excellence will be lost if the government is allowed to control it. And what we need instead is some way of using this private sector excellence to extend coverage to more people. And the way to do that is to reduce regulation of the market. That is to allow insurance providers to offer cheaper packages.
That's right.
It is to allow clinics to be built where business people think that a clinic can work. Currently, you need approval from the government before you can build a clinic. And they'll do a needs assessment, and if they think that a clinic is not needed in a certain place, then you can't build one there. And that is, interference that doesn't improve the quality of health treatment in South Africa. So I would say deregulation, the involvement of the private sector, and competition, those would be the elements we need in order to have a really well-functioning and as universal as possible health system in South Africa.
Fully agreed. John, I must go into questions here. I've been sort of just acknowledging people in the question section. I'm going to begin with the ultimate sharpshooter. Eita, my brother, welcome to the show. Sharpshooter says, is it possible to repay these loans given the ANC is going to run South Africa till 2024? The economy wasn't growing before the lockdown. Do you think the ANC is going to cut spending?
Well, it has announced plans to cut the public sector wage bill, plans which are already being fiercely opposed by the unions and commentators on the left. I think there are parts of the government that are willing and that really would want to get back to on the path of fiscal probity. But there are also large parts that don't want to.
Yeah.
And it's not clear yet who's going to win that. And maybe if I can put a sort of slightly Machiavellian idea out there, I think that now is a good time for the government to indebt itself and speculate on defaulting. Because 5 or 10 years from now, everybody will recognize and admit that these were exceptional times. The COVID crisis was a global pandemic that hit the global economy very hard, that required lots of countries to go into very deep debt. And under these exceptional circumstances, it was to be expected that countries over-indebted themselves. And looking ahead a few years into the future, it may well be that there's a debt forgiveness program that even the South African government would be able to make use of.
Let me maybe jump into that issue a bit. Two questions. One from Heather B, coming to us from London. Hey, Heather, welcome to the show.
Hello, Heather.
BDL and John, wouldn't it be great if the IMF sent auditors to see where the previous COVID money went before lending theirs? That's a question from Heather. So just hold that one as I go to Vernon, who says, where do you guys think the debt bubble may hit? Will they prescribe our pensions first? So those two questions.
So to Heather's question, it probably would be good to first do an audit on where the money went. Most of the monies that have been spent so far have been local monies. In other words, if the South African government lost them, then the South African government must go and find them. But I do think that international lenders, and especially the IMF, partly also as a result of the campaigns that the IRR has been running, are alert to the fact that monies do tend to get misspent here. And I think that's why their note was so quite outspoken in diplomatic terms and calling for clean governance and clean management of the funds.
That's right.
And Vernon's question?
Yeah, just a quick reminder, Vernon. When do you guys think the debt bubble may hit? Will they prescribe our pensions first or before that?
I really don't know, Vernon. That's a very difficult question, and particularly because of the sort of this panic we've seen in the ANC in the past week. I think this really changes the possible scenarios that might play out over the next few years. It is possible that the ANC might get such a fright that it will tighten the reins on spending and try to be a bit more responsible about how it uses public money. There's an election probably next year. I think the fact that the ANC was so upset during this week is an indication that they're expecting that election to happen and for it not to be shifted as they've been proposing. So they know, they are in difficulties.
That's right.
And they will need to take some sort of actions if they will still want to do well in the elections, because I think currently the mood is quite strongly turned against the ANC.
Absolutely. In fact, I want to go back to Sharpshooter, who asked the follow-up question. Maybe that touches on the issue of elections and specifically the local government elections, albeit from a different angle. Sharpshooter says, this would be the perfect time to promote federalism and more power to local government. Citizens can't be held responsible for irresponsible fiscal policy by government. Your thoughts, John, before I go to another question?
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, what we're seeing from the ANC is our moves to centralize power. So we've got the proposal from the corporate governance minister to increase the power of district command councils, I think they're called. So this is effectively a way of allowing national government to influence events at the more local level, at the district and municipality level. And again, I think the thinking is that so many municipalities are failing because they are being looted and because they're appointing incompetent people. And therefore, we must send in people from national government to sort things out. But that's a crazy idea because national government also isn't working. So, I think that idea is doomed to failure. And ultimately, you're absolutely right that the only thing that is going to work is decentralization and people doing things for themselves at a local level. And wherever you stay, get in touch with your community, do things in your community, do things together with your fellow citizens, because you can't trust the government to do things for you.
That's right. Guys, if you're just joining us, it is the last 8 minutes of the show. Where have you been? You're late. You're watching Late Nights with Big Daddy Liberty, the easy chatting Sunday evening show. I'm in conversation with John Endres, who is the Chief of staff at the IRR. Gert van Rensburg het 'n vraag na my en hy vra oh sorry, he's actually asking in English. I don't know why I just did that. Sorry Gert. Why nationalize healthcare? Isn't there already a massive allocation each year in the budget? Therefore, if you have a private healthcare insurance or medical aid, we're already paying twice. Gert, I agree. That's effectively, that's the big shame and the big crime, in a way, of ANC governance, is that it's taxing people to the hilt in the name of providing all of these services, often, arguing that it will provide them to poorer South Africans, which we all are quite happy about, right? It's the one thing we all it's the one thing we South Africans all agree on. It's the idea that, empowerment policy, whether it's providing enabling opportunities like solid healthcare, solid education, should prioritize the poor. And those of us who have the means to fund ourselves, whether it's private education or private healthcare, we accept that, right? But the problem is it's not happening. And you're right to be angry and saying you're therefore being almost taxed twice to an extent. And I think John made the point quite ably to say, this is where perhaps innovation in government and innovation in the basket of ideas that dominate our society should be ones that err on the side of according as much freedom as possible for the private sector to be able to get involved, to chip in, and for it to extend its services to poor people. So I think there's definitely a conversation to be had around that, and it's part of the ground war that I'm waging. Is to push these ideas into poorer communities, to say that they actually don't have to be relegated to ideas that suggest that they should only have the state provide services to them. That you can actually rejig things and have those that same money the state spends to bring the private sector closer to them, the private sector quality closer to them. So, for example, on education, you could literally have a situation where we break up the education budget and give it to parents directly in the form of a voucher for the parent to decide where they want to send their kids to get an education. Thereby then encouraging the private sector to literally invest in poorer communities, because poorer communities would have the capital by way of this voucher. So there are these innovative ideas that I'm pushing into these communities. So please support BDL, support the work that I'm doing. It's to get these sort of ideas into those communities. John, let me find another question here. As I sort of troll down, there's a cheeky comment here from Fred Kruger. When the ANC borrow money, share prices in BMW and Mercedes go up. I agree, my brother. Hey, man, these dealerships have been doing really well when that 500 billion was announced. But let me see a question now. Okay. Vernon again. Do you guys think they may postpone the municipal elections? In fact, you've actually touched on this already, John. The ANC and EFF both have made noises as such. Just very quickly, Vernon, make sure you go to the Daily Friend website. That's www.dailyfriend.co.za. There is a very good article on this issue on there. John, do you want to maybe chip in?
Yeah, so I do think that it would be convenient for them because, at the moment, public disgust is very, very great with the ANC. And if an election were held now, they'd be afraid of losing, a lot of power, maybe even losing the majority. And so I can see that the hope would be to, if you can just put it out a few more years, maybe spend some more money to rebuy some confidence in the movement, maybe clean up a little bit, then maybe the results would be better. But I think it is going to be a tall order because imagine at the local level, you'd have your same councillors for 8 years instead of 5 years. And that is something that the Constitution does not allow. So postponing the elections, I think, would take some sort of constitutional change, which is difficult to engineer. And the public pushback, I think, is also quite strong.
Absolutely.
I imagine people would get very angry if they were not able to show the ANC what they think.
That's right.
At elections next year.
That's right.
At the moment, I think it's not going to happen.
Absolutely. Guys, as we wrap up the conversation in the last 2 minutes that I have my guest on, I'm going to take one more question here from Ulungile Ngwenya. Lungile, welcome to the show, my brother. This one's directed at you, John. John, let's say after COVID, whenever that is, according to this is a question from Lungile. No more cash in the country. What kind of zombie apocalypse do you see SA going through? Maybe do you want to end off by forecasting what a South Africa would look like in a situation like that?
It's a terrible question, Lungile, and I wish I didn't have to answer it.
Yeah.
let me say that I'm by nature an optimist, and what I see happening is a lot of suffering already, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I think many of the companies that were already struggling during lockdown, April, no income, May, no income, June, no income, have used up their reserves, and a lot of people are going to lose their jobs now in August and September, and times will be very, very difficult. The thing that gives me a bit of hope is that South Africans are resourceful. We try to find solutions to problems, and I really hope that we will be able to find solutions to these problems as well. And I believe that we can if we are given the freedom to do so. So that is my hope and my wish, is that South Africans get given the space to develop solutions to solve their own problems, because I don't think the government can do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe on that note, John, let me call it an evening, and thank you very much for joining me. John, of course, is the Chief of Staff at the Institute of Race Relations. John will be a regular on the show, so you can look forward to him, especially in the more sort of panel discussion type shows that I'll be doing. John, maybe a final word, and how do we find you on social media?
So my Twitter handle is Senderman, and Sender is an anagram of my surname Endres. That's why it's Senderman. I chose it in the moment of lightheadedness. And otherwise, I'm also on Facebook, and I look forward to interacting with you.
Absolutely, my brother. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Sitle.
Absolutely. That's John Senderman. Excuse me, John Endres. There you see, it's already working, John. That's John Endres from the Institute of Race Relations. Guys, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been an absolute wonderful show. And look, remember, Sunday nights, the late night with sorry guys, it's getting a little later. The Sunday evening show is always just a chat, a easy chat between you and me. You can always look forward to the more hard-hitting stuff on a Wednesday with the Big Daddy Liberty show, or Blacks Only. That'll alternate those two shows. So you can always look forward to that for more hard-hitting stuff. Guys, speaking about hard-hitting, stay tuned to the Big Daddy Liberty show. I am going to bring you some really interesting content, including a lot of the groundwork that I'm doing in communities across the country. Look forward to some really interesting stuff. I'm not going to share much yet, except to say that, guys, the winds of change are blowing. The winds of change are definitely blowing. And I'm hoping to bring you as much of that as I possibly can here on the BDL show. So with that being said, let me say good night to every single one of you, and thank you so much for watching. Remember, if you want to support the show and you want to support the work that I'm doing, especially now that I am out and about traveling and doing the groundwork, it's very easy. Find me on Patreon, and you can donate as little as $1 a month, guys. That's like 17 Rand a month towards my work. And you can do that by going onto Patreon and searching BDL, and you can choose how much you want to donate there, or you can just donate directly by going to PayPal and sending money, to Big Daddy Liberty ZA@gmail.com. But all that information is in the descriptor of the video. And with that being said, guys, once again, thank you so much for joining me. And remember, as I always say, never trust a commie.